Great. I think it's always a good idea to start a Google Hangout with your microphone muted. So the first minute that I just did was completely muted. That's amazing. Okay, I'll start again. Today we're going to be looking at how to recover from complex PTSD. We're going to be looking at it from a slightly different angle than usual, and how to break the spell of the zombie witch doctor. Later on, I'm going to be inviting some people to come on and talk to join the Hangout. If you do want to do that, then that's fine. I'll explain how we'll do that in a minute. But just remember that this is being posted sort of instantly. I think it's got like a 5-second delay on it to YouTube, and it's being recorded, so it'll be kept as a YouTube video forever and ever until the end of human civilization. So if you don't want to say anything with your face in public that random strangers on the internet can see, don't volunteer for that. You can just either ask the questions in the Q&A section if you're watching this on a Google Plus page, or you can ask the questions that you have in the comment section on the YouTube page. I'm just going to go and look at that and check. People have been asking me how to use this all day. I have no idea. This is not my field of expertise at all. I'm not a very techie person. Okay, can people comment on this video? No. Well, that's annoying. Okay, I'm going to try and fix that now. The main focus of what we'll be looking at today is reducing emotional flashbacks. That's absolutely key to tackling complex PTSD. If you want like a very simple solution up front, like at the beginning of this virtual seminar, as it were, for handling complex PTSD, it is to simply and purely remain focused on the emotional flashback, which is the primary symptom of complex PTSD. And the best way to do that, the best way to resolve your emotional flashbacks, is to regularly acknowledge that you are indeed in an emotional flashback. If you can say, this isn't me, this isn't the way I would normally respond to the situation, I think I'm in an emotional flashback right now, then you can conquer it over time. We're going to get into a little bit more some of the tools, techniques, and tactics for doing that in a moment. I'm just going to try and make it so people can comment on the video. It says here, enable, allow comments. Yep, that's ticked. Save changes. And watch as nothing changes. If you can't ask questions in the comment section on YouTube, then you're going to need to find it on the Google Plus page, and then use the question and answer app that is available there. I'll just check this and see if it's worked. No, it says comments are still disabled. That's very annoying. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know why it's saying that. Okay, I'm going to crack on. Okay, I'm just going to read you something that is from Layla Lorrick's new book. Layla Lorrick just wrote a new book that's available now on Amazon. I'll give you the link for that after this Hangout is finished. And it's about her story of how she overcame complex PTSD and reduced her emotional flashbacks. Everybody's a little bit different. Layla Lorrick suffered narcissistic abuse in different scenarios over the course of her life, but most recently and most destructively was a 3-year-long relationship in an environment in which she was isolated and trapped with the man who was a psychopath, true antisocial personality disorder. He also demonstrated elements of borderline, covert narcissism, and overt narcissism, was a bit of a sadist and a megalomaniac too. So a true dark tetrad zombie witch doctor. And this, as many of you now understand through your learnings will know, causes a sort of a mega emotional flashback. It's like bringing together all the various emotional flashbacks from all the various traumas in a person's life, and then bringing them to one place and firing it off, so they actually go into a huge superstorm of an emotional flashback. And over time, quite quickly, over a period of about 12 to 14 months, Layla managed to diminish most of that trauma and most of those emotional flashbacks. She actually did really, really well in a very short period of time. Those who are new to this will be thinking 12 months, that's ages, but it's actually really quick compared to what most people can do when it comes to handling CPTSD. She read the Pete Walker book on complex PTSD diligently and actually practiced what he advised, and I gave her some help too, and she managed to resolve a lot of it very, very quickly. I'm just going to read you a quick excerpt from the book, which I thought was pretty cool and should be quite useful for anybody who's interested in this subject. I'm just going to check my Q&A is working on the Google Hangout thing. Da, da, da. Ask your audience to submit questions. Found question section on Google, says Brenda. Well done, Brenda. Okay, people are here. Okay, that's fantastic. Right, I will go through those questions in a moment, guys, and girls. I'm just going to read you this section from Layla Lorrick's new book on overcoming complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Individuals who suffer CPTSD often have histories of many different types of traumatic events that went on for many years or even decades, often including exposure to mentally unhealthy environments. One important common characteristic during these traumas will be that the victim is held in an actual or perceived state of captivity and has been in a context of interpersonal dependence at the same time as they were being psychologically manipulated. So what Layla is pointing out here is that the person who's got complex PTSD, they've often been held in isolation and captivity, and they feel like they can't escape from the person who is psychologically abusing them. But she also points out there's frequently a context of interpersonal dependence. So I always use the example of political prisoners, because you will become trauma bonded as a prisoner to the prison guards. Because you are in a state of interpersonal dependence with them. They are responsible for your shelter, for your food, for your most primal needs, for the base of the pyramid in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that puts them in a very, very powerful position, even at the deepest, most unconscious and primal levels of your psychology. She goes on, Layla goes on. These types of environments slowly erode or deform the victim's identity and sense of self, which can be noticed on many levels of their thoughts and behavior. So what Layla's pointing out here is what I've pointed out. See, I first noticed it in myself before I noticed it in any of my clients, is weirdness. You know, you kind of get a bit weird, and the self-isolation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like you it's almost like at an unconscious level, you sort of cause other people to reject you or to move away from you, so that the torture becomes self-perpetuated. The self-isolation is self-perpetuated, which is the opposite of what you need. When you are seeking to recover, you actually need support. You need to be in contact with other humans who are boundaried, who are not codependent, who don't have porous ego boundaries, who can guide you through this process, or not even guide you, just support you and be there for you and listen to you. But your deepest instinct, unfortunately, because of the poison that is inside of you, because of the poison that's placed there by the zombie witch doctor, is to self-isolate, and you become a bit weird. People with CPTSD can be odd. And the thing is, I noticed that in myself, and I noticed that I didn't really have a very sensitive attitude to that. I kind of knew that I was being eccentric. I knew that I was accidentally putting people off. At some point, I think it was around the end of 2013, one of the things that really helped me was to stand back and say, okay, I need to take a long, hard, objective look at myself and how I come across to people. And if I'm actually communicating what I want to communicate about myself to people in a way that's effective or not. And, you know, it was a humbling experience and required a lot of vulnerability. Now, recently at a London seminar, I suggested this to a room full of 70 odd people, and they were, you know, quite happy to take that feedback on. And they were kind of nodding and smiling, going, yeah, I can be a bit odd. I don't mean to say the things I say, and I don't mean to say it in the way that I say it. Sometimes it just comes out that way. So I'll just reread what Layla Lorrick wrote. This is a reading from her new book, which I'll give you the link for. It's available on Amazon Kindle. I'll give you the link for that at the end of this hangout. These types of environments, the abusive environments where there is captivity and interpersonal dependence, slowly erode or deform the victim's identity and sense of self, which can be noticed on many levels of their thoughts and behavior. People who suffer from CPTSD risk being misunderstood as inherently dependent, masochistic, or self-defeating. The term has also overlapping symptoms as problems with attachment with the cluster B personality disorder called borderline. So Layla's pointing out here something that I've been trying to say to people is, look, you could get very easily misdiagnosed as having borderline personality disorder if you carry CPTSD. Because of the emotional dysregulation, because of the interpersonal turbulence in your friendships, in your relationships, because of your tendency to misinterpret reality, catastrophic thinking, black and white thinking, certain self-destructive or impulsive patterns of behavior, greater levels of addiction, impulsivity, poor impulse control, that kind of thing. So you could end up being misdiagnosed as borderline. The problem is, and this is fairly new for me, so I'm sorry if I'm contradicting things that I've said in older videos, and not everybody people watch my YouTube videos, and I think some of them are going, well, this is when he said this in the sequence in which I watched it, but they're not reading the dates when it was uploaded. So I used to talk about something called benign borderlines, benign borderline personality disorder. There's no such thing. Borderline personality disorder must be understood as a subtype of narcissism. Some clinicians are even comparing it to covert narcissism or fragile narcissism. So don't get it twisted. If you've got that borderline personality disorder diagnosis, but you are not predatory, not entitled, not fundamentally exploitative, then it ain't you. It's CPTSD. But let's also not engage in being facile in our thinking here. That doesn't mean that you get off scot-free. Just because you've got CPTSD, not borderline, doesn't mean you're not capable of being a dickhead. You can still be a dickhead. You can still be abusive. You can still be totally morally wrong. It just means that you don't, thankfully, you, meaning one, meaning also me, doesn't have that narcissistic shell that can't be penetrated. If that narcissistic shell is there and it's in deep, there ain't much hope for you. So a true borderline has the narcissistic shell. The narcissistic shell protects the individual at the deepest levels, the more vulnerable feelings, from any sense of wrongdoing or guilt or shame, and it makes them feel invulnerable. Every accusation or wrongdoing that hits the narcissistic shell bounces off, and it gets reformatted into denial and projection. So whatever you tell me I did wrong, whatever it is, I could have hit you, I could have cheated on you, it could be anything at all, I will utterly deny it, utterly deny the wrongness of it, and project it back onto my victim as something that they did or that they caused to happen. People with CPTSD, thank God, don't have that problem. They don't have a narcissistic shell. So I don't want you to get confused on this point and think that just because you've got CPTSD doesn't mean you can't be abusive. You can be abusive. Layla Lorick is writing from the perspective of a trauma style of flight and freeze. I come from a trauma style that tends towards fawn and fight. Those of you who are familiar with CPTSD and the Pete Walker book on CPTSD know that people who are into fight and fawn often manifest with narcissistic patterns of behavior, true NPDs. So you got to have humility and self-awareness, and a pretty strict, old-fashioned adherence to philosophy and logic and reason. You've got to pull yourself out of subjectivity and emotion and back into objectivity, and using your intellect in a way that is responsible and effective in order to get yourself out of the swamp that you can be plunged into. So here are some of the common symptoms the book goes on to say. Here are some of the common symptoms of CPTSD. Emotional flashbacks, strong inner and outer critic. That means you're highly critical of yourself, highly critical of others. Self-abandonment. We've all done a bit of that at one time or another, I'm sure. Fragile self-esteem, relationship difficulties, radical mood changes, dissociation, hypervigilance, oversensitivity to stress, and toxic shame. The symptoms themselves fall into 6 general groups that have been considered for the diagnosis of CPTSD. The 6 general groups are changes in regulation of affect and impulse, very, very closely tied to diagnoses of borderline personality disorder. What's a clinician to do? I mean, you know, I'm no never going to be a big apologist or supporter for the way mainstream mental health is carried on, but I must, you know, in the name of fairness, say what is a traditionally mainstream trained clinician to do. They've been given a list of symptoms and they've been told, well, this is borderline personality disorder, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't exist for them. So if they're seeing huge changes in regulation of affect and impulses, they're going to go, ah, this is borderline, not CPTSD. Number two, changes in attention or consciousness. For example, disassociation or forgetfulness. In the aftermath of a traumatic relationship, even before you knew about the term emotional flashback or CPTSD, did you not notice a greater propensity for disassociation or forgetfulness? Is it not known even in the mainstream media? Haven't you seen that in films where they want to show somebody who's a soldier returning from war with PTSD and they're disassociated and forgetful and self-abandoning? I'm sure you have. Number three, this is another general group considered for the diagnosis of CPTSD. Changes in self-perception. For example, paralysis of initiative, feelings of guilt and shame and self-blame. I'm laughing, but there's nothing funny about this because, yet again, this overlaps with classical PTSD and borderline personality disorder. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Many times when they're testing war veterans, combat veterans with PTSD, they're going, oh, they actually take a lot of boxes for borderline personality disorder. Number four, changes in relations with others. For example, disruption and distrust in intimate relationships, isolation and withdrawal, and assigning total, many times perceived, power to an abuser. This is what I've referred to as putting the abuser on a pedestal, putting narcissist on a pedestal. The rather unhelpful tendency that you can get in not all, but some of the online narcissism communities to talk about narcissists as though they are otherworldly, superpowered beings, apex predators, alpha males and alpha females. Yes, they can seem that way, and yes, to a degree, it can be useful to talk and think about them in that way. But there has to be a limit to that because it's not real. And if your ideas about reality don't match up to the way reality actually really is, well, that's pretty much a good working definition of insanity. It's not a healthy way of approaching the world. Number five, somatization. This is an interesting one. Somatization is a way of changing psychological effects into physical effects. Repressed feelings of fear become expressed as sensations of anxiety inside of the body. It's bordering on the study of psychoneuroimmunology, or the way in which the mind and the emotions can actually make the individual sick. And the rather ironic way that it frequently seems to be that people who have, I don't know, the psychological tendency to, for example, not want to see something can end up with eye trouble, or they don't want to hear something and they end up with ear trouble, and so on. Or they can't stomach a situation and they end up with problems in their digestive system. These possibly could be examples of somatization. I don't know. Maybe they could be. And number six, changes in systems of meaning. For example, being unable to sustain faith. Again, I'm sure we can all think of examples and cases where people have been through traumatic experiences and then afterwards they found that their entire religious or spiritual outlook has been challenged so deeply that they just can't maintain their faith. And this is one of the major symptoms I've seen of post-traumatic embitterment syndrome. Okay, so that's just there to give you, I thought that was pretty cool. That's from Layla Lorrick's new book. I'll give you the link for that. It's available on Amazon Kindle. You can download it instantly, and I'll give you the link for that in a little bit. Okay, so the primary focus of what I want to talk to you about today, leading on from what I just read from Layla Lorrick's book there, is how do we recover from this? How do you recover from CPTSD? I don't think there's any way of doing it without fundamentally changing your philosophy of life. You know, if you've got porous ego boundaries, if you are matching up for people pleaser syndrome or being a codependent, I don't see how you're going to get past the CPTSD without also resolving all of these other issues at the same time. You know, being a people pleaser, being a codependent, being the type of person who ends up frequently under the jackboot of a Nazi fascist abuser is intrinsically tied to complex PTSD, because in my view, it's tied to the emotional flashbacks. What I mean by this is that in order for you to, let's break it down to real simple, like this is how I would, like if I ever had to explain this to, you know, like I used to teach a lot of 16, 17 and 18-year-olds. I used to work in secondary school. So they get stuff like this, but sometimes it's good to just break it down to the building blocks of, okay, here's the basics, here's the essentials that you really need to know. And this is what I would do. This is how I would say it. At the beginning of a relationship where you have what seems to be a normal person ending up being in the clutches of what, to all intents and purposes, a not very nice person, how does that happen? How does a normal person end up being in love with and involved with, possibly captivated by and isolated by somebody who's not very nice? Well, CPTSD, emotional flashbacks. But Richard, what do you mean? What have these two things got to do with each other? I should tell you, listen on. This person, the nice person, and this person, the nasty person, start to do the narcissistic codependent dance when this person starts to feel guilty on behalf of what this person says they experienced in their life. So if this one, Mrs. Nasty, can make Mr. Nice feel guilty and sorry for her because the nasty things that she experienced earlier on in her life, or maybe that she never experienced at all, she's just making the whole fucking thing up, then that emotional flashback of guilt and shame hooks Mr. Nice in and pulls him in. That's at the first phase of the relationship, because you'd be like, how did you even end up with this person? They're such a dick. Why would you do that? But guilt and shame are very, very powerful emotions for human beings anyway, but even more so if you're suffering from CPTSD, because if you're suffering from CPTSD, it's likely you were raised in what they call adverse childhood conditions, otherwise known as a shitty upbringing by parents who are probably not very nice. And one of the common tools that would be used by parents who are not very nice will be to guilt and shame the child in order to control them, because it's just a lazy, easy way of doing it. The other way would be to beat them and terrify them into submission. All of these things create, you know, the beatings, the guilting, the shaming creates breaks in the child's ego boundaries, because it's just too much. It's too much force on that fragile ego personality. The ego hasn't yet formed. It's still trying to form. It's trying to form its sense of self and its place in the world, and it's being smashed by very heavy cluster B style emotionally abusive attacks. So guilt and shame is powerful in terms of bringing people in. What keeps an adult, sane, rational man or woman in a relationship with somebody who is clearly sick, who's clearly very unpleasant? Everybody can see. So we're going to switch. The common narrative on the online narcissism forums is narcissistic men and victim women. So I'm going to switch the narrative around here, because this was my experience. So you have Mr. Nice, Mrs. Nasty. Why does Mr. Nice, who has a degree in psychology, who is a master practitioner of NLP, let's use that example, stick around with Mrs. Nasty when everybody around him can see that she's bad, can see that she's not very nice? Again, as I said before, complex PTSD and emotional flashbacks. She controls him. She pulls the strings. They're attached to him like a puppeteer. Like, here's the puppeteer's hands, and here's the little puppet down here, and the strings are in him or her, depending on the example. And on the end of those strings are hooks. So every time I pull that string, it's pain that makes the hand or the leg fly up and obey my every whim and every command. I've used this metaphor before, citing the horror movie based on the Clive Barker book Hellraiser, where they put, you know, hooks in people. And it was his metaphor, because the original book Hellraiser was called The Hellbound Heart, and it's essentially a story of heartache and what it feels like to be torn apart by the pain of loss, of heartbreak, the unimaginable torture of true heartache. So these are the hooks. Now, why does that work? Well, every single hook is in an emotional wound, and every time it's pulled, what's the pain? The pain is an emotional flashback. So every little tweak. I knew a guy who was quite abusive, and he had like a goal that everybody was surprised that he was with, and he would be asked like, how did this happen? And he actually called the process of pulling her strings tweaking the reins. So if he wanted to control her, if he felt like she was getting out of control, he would call it tweaking the reins. And that tweak, because not a big effort on their part, sparks an emotional flashback of guilt, shame, rage, abandonment issues, depression, the abandonment melange, as Pete Walker talks about it. So there's actually a huge amount of power that they have because they can see the emotional wounds and then they tug at them and they pull on them. And that's what keeps you in the emotionally abusive relationship, is CPTSD and emotional flashback. So then you come to the question of, what do you do about that? Well, you can hang around online talking about how bad narcissists are for a while, and that might help for 3 months or 4 months or 6 months, maybe. But ultimately, you've then got to come back to you, and you've got to come back to yourself and get on with your own life, because it's not enough to just get over the last relationship, or at least it wasn't for me. I wanted a way, because I was big on security. I was big on self-protection. That was my job. I was a self-defense instructor working in the security industry for years. And certainty and security are big core values for me. I wanted to know, how can I know this will never happen again? How can I cauterize this wound? And I don't care how painful it is, and I don't care how long the process lasts, and I don't care what it does to me. I want to know that this never can happen to me again. And the only way is to actually look at the core issues, look at the adverse childhood conditions, look at the emotional flashbacks, and attempt to reduce them and attempt to tackle the complex PTSD. So the first thing that you need to do, and this is straight from the Pete Walker handbook, is to actually educate yourself about complex PTSD. You get a better understanding of what it is, its mechanics, how it manifests, and of emotional flashbacks and understanding them and how they work. A zombie witch doctor, a narcissist, a psychopath, somebody with antisocial personality disorder, an abuser, whatever you want to call them, can't reel you in if you're a black belt in CPTSD and you've resolved your issues. A zombie witch doctor can't hold you in an abusive relationship if you've dealt with your CPTSD and resolved your emotional flashback issues. It's impossible, because they don't have any hooks. They don't have any hooks they can hold over you. We're not talking about situations of actual kidnap, torture, and murder here. We're talking about situations of emotional abuse, psychological abuse. Yes, occasionally it spills over into violence, but it's not the predominant means of intimidation, bullying, guilt tripping, and control. So how are you going to do that? You've got to educate yourself on the subject. You've really got to study it and look deeply at it, and you're going to have to spend more time on it than you would really like to. And I've spoken to some clients who are like, but I don't want to do that. I've spent enough time on this guy. He's a dick. I don't want it to take. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have anything else. There's nothing else I have for you. You've got to actually deal with the intrinsic core issues, and you've got to do the work, and you've got to wade knee deep, sometimes hip deep, in shit and transcend it. You know, it's like in Buddhism, man. The lotus flower. Why is the lotus flower the symbol of Buddhism? Because it grows up through the mud. It doesn't float around the mud on some hippie, drippy, beardy, weirdy, fake unicorn trip, pretending it's doing spiritual work and avoiding all the dirty stuff. It just grows through it towards the light. And that's what you got to do. Some people don't want to talk about their parents. They don't want to talk about their family life. Well, boo-hoo for you. You got to do it. There's no avoiding it. It has to be done. And anybody who's resolved any kind of CPTSD or emotional flashback issue, it's the only way that works. Everything else is going to waste your time, frustrate you, and you'll always have to come back to this. So why not just accept it and get on with it? Emotional flashbacks are key. And that means you need to have the humility to sort of say, okay, I thought I did all this psychotherapy work. I thought I did all this personal development work, but really I was just masturbating my ego. And maybe you learned a few tricks. Maybe you learned a few cool things. Maybe you met some good people along the way, and I'm not taking that away from anyone. I know I did. I know I learned some cool stuff, but it really did not help. It really did not get deep enough. You've actually got to get into the emotional flashback issue. And that means you need to have the humility and the vulnerability to realize that you spend a lot of time in an emotional flashback. You spend an awful lot of time emotionally flashbacking. So when you flip the fuck out because somebody takes your car parking space in a car park, or you're involved in a road rage incident, or somebody says they're going to pick you up and they forget, and you totally overreact to the scenario, having no consideration for where the other person is coming from, or blah blah blah, blah, or the flimsiness of your own communication, or whatever it is. That's an emotional flashback. So you're not getting upset about the thing that is actually there. You're getting upset about the historical event that looks like the thing that is actually there. So I had a client who said that she felt very guilty because she had her partner that week had forgotten to pick up her medication, and she went ballistic. And I was like, well, you know, forgetting to pick up your medication, is it a reasonable response or not? Because it's pretty serious. Like, we can talk, let's philosophize. We're two adults. We're feeling good. We're in a good state. Is it good or bad? I was like, well, it's reasonable. It's okay. I mean, he's really busy and blah, 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 blah. But it was my response. My response. My feeling was inappropriate. And I'm like, this is an emotionally mature client. This is an emotionally mature client who can actually understand that it's not really about what he did so much as how she's responding to it in that moment. And don't get this twisted with any kind of moral relativism that it's not what your abuser did to you, it's how you respond. That's all bullshit. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about emotional flashbacks. I'm not talking about like that kind of moral relativism as it applies to abuse. That's no good. That's bad. You need moral absolutism. Some things in the world are just wrong. It is wrong to trick somebody into loving you so that you can steal their money or their, you know, whatever it is in order to get what you want, and then to torture them into staying with you over a period of time, even though it'd be better for them to leave. That's completely wrong, and there's no excuse for that. What I'm talking about here is looking at situations where, with your objectivity, with your critical thinking, with your rational philosophical mind being disciplined and focused and calm, and saying, okay, what is actually here? Not what am I responding to, or what am I feeling about this, but what is actually here. Being able to make that decision and say, this is an inappropriate response, therefore I'm going to assume I'm in an emotional flashback right now. Just knowing you're in an emotional flashback can help. And then it's a case of getting the resources to be able to reduce those emotional flashbacks. I've created courses around that you can get, and you can download them, and you can listen to them, and there's audios and videos and all kinds of things. But basically all that I can do, and all that anybody can do, is to bring you back, bring your consciousness back mindfully to a place of saying, hey, emotional flashbacks exist. Shit things happened to me that I was not in control of, that I couldn't escape. And now I experience something called emotional flashbacks. Don't be judgmental. Don't get all weird about that and be all mean with yourself. I'm fucking useless because I have emotional flashbacks. It's just a thing. It just happens. Just be curious. Just be a psychologist for once, or a philosopher, and go, that's interesting. And what is my trauma response style? Am I becoming aggressive? Am I becoming sad? Am I fading out? Or am I completely frozen with paralysis in the face of these things? There's 4 responses that you're likely to have. And then do the work that is based on your typical trauma response style. You know, for me, it's I have to deal with a lot of anger management issues. And I'm also a codependent, so I have a tendency to fight or to fawn. So I either want to beat the fuck out of somebody or negotiate with people that I shouldn't be negotiating with. Neither response is appropriate for a grown man. These are the kinds of things that can get you in trouble, possibly even in jail. So you've got to look at that as a responsible adult and say, well, what do I want from my life? How am I going to deal with this? And see it for what it is. It's extremely dangerous. It's extremely debilitating. There's nothing cool about being a codependent. There's nothing cool about being a people pleaser. It's bad. These things are addictions. These addictions were forced upon you at a time in your life where you were too young and too vulnerable and too soft to say no. Now it is time for me to go and read through the questions and answers on the Google Plus page. Please hold the line. You're in a queue. I'm so sorry that the comments are disabled on YouTube. I've hit the button that says make them active, enable them, and nothing is happening, and I don't know why. So I apologize. Okay, I can only take questions on the Google Plus page, guys. I'm really sorry about that. Every other time it's worked, right? Every other time I've done this, it's been absolutely fine, but today it's not doing it. All right, let's have a look at some questions then. Oh, there's a lot. Okay. How do I, right. I don't want to miss anybody. There's some that are off the page here. Somebody has written, Rose has written, I've become so isolated that I wonder if I'm going along the Buddhist path of detachment. Is isolation following the Buddhist path of detachment? You know, I have a little comment about that. It's not mine originally. I don't know who said it originally, but there was maybe I got it from a novel or something. It was about the cowardice of Buddhist monks and Buddhist nuns, and it applies to all religions. And it was a tongue-in-cheek statement that it's actually easy to be spiritual if you go and live in a monastery. If you go and like leave the city, leave the town, you know, it's like monasteries. They tend to be higher up. The Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who was later known as Osho, who eventually died of AIDS because he couldn't keep his tinkle in his pants, and kept on shagging all of his followers. He said the same thing. He said, you know, if you're always up in the hills, if you're always up in the mountains, it's easy to be spiritual up there. It's quiet up there. You can't smell, you know, the traffic. You can't hear the traffic. You can't smell the shit. You don't see all the drama and the trauma and people being cruel to each other. It's really easy. You just go and hang out there and chat to some ants, talk to some birds, do a bit of fasting, do a bit of chanting. Got no worries. Just eat a bit of rice every day, do some meditation. That's easy. That would be the easy way. So I'm not sure, but yeah, you know, it's typically you're saying self-isolation. Am I following the Buddhist path of detachment? Truly, the Buddhist path of detachment, to me, by my understanding, limited as it is, would be to be involved in the world, but to stay detached, even amongst all that heavy stress and stimuli. Just a thought. I can't see all of the questions. I'm only getting a selection of the questions, but I'm going to go through them really quickly. I've stopped smoking, but I still take nicotine gum. Okay. I'm not progressing in my recovery as fast as I'd like, and I'm wondering if nicotine could be the reason, as it helps me distract. Could nicotine be that detrimental? I doubt it. I don't think any one addiction that you've got is going to stop you from growing and moving forward. You know, so the answer to your question would be no, but you know, you should stop that shit. It's not good for you. We're animals. We're the beautiful eternal creatures of the savannas and the jungles. You shouldn't be doing that to yourself. You should go and talk to a bird, chew some grass or something. How do I pinpoint my ex-narcissistic lover's mystery intentions on hurting me? How do I pinpoint my ex-narcissistic lover's mystery intentions on hurting me? I don't know, because I don't know what your question means. Did they have intentions of hurting you? You could pinpoint or identify. You could write it down. You could journal it, maybe. Identify interactions and scenarios where, you know, write down your perception of what occurred. Maybe try writing it in the third person, like it happened to another person called Bob, and the girl is called Murray, because this is written from the point of view of a guy. And write down the interaction and write down, from a philosophical, from a psychological point of view, a detached point of view, how you think, what's right, what's wrong, where are the moral issues here? Did Mary have a moral responsibility to Bob to treat him differently? Why would she say the thing that she said? Isn't that a hurtful thing to do? When you know, that kind of thing, you could try and, when you're looking to pinpoint and bring some sanity to the craziness of a narcissistic abusive relationship, that could be helpful. It's been 2 years and trust has been an issue of this result of our toxicity in whatever illusional relationship I had kept on with her. That is one tortured sentence, homie. Trust has been an issue of this result of our toxicity in whatever illusional relationship I had kept with her. Yeah, that's common. It's common for people to not be able to trust, because you just learned something that you didn't really want to know about human nature, which is now inside of your head forever, that people can be very, very evil and very malicious. Do you have any thoughts on depersonalization disorder? Symptoms seem similar to CPTSD, results from same thing, identity destruction from abusers. I would say that I don't want to be boring or a zealot about this, but I think depersonalization disorder is probably, from the little I know of it, better explained as a manifestation of CPTSD, somewhere in the flight and freeze cluster. A desire to not be there. I can't escape physically, so I'll escape mentally. I'll cease to be here, I'll cease to be me. But yes, you're absolutely right in what you say there. It does result from the same thing, which is identity destruction from the abuser. Somebody's offering advice. The solution, this comes from Eileen. The solution to getting to Google Q&A, click on the Rubik's Cube looking icon toward the upper right of the black part of the screen, then click the Q&A icon that pops up. Ta-da! Smiley face. Thank you for that, Eileen. That's good advice. Brenda says she found the question section on Google. Well done. I'm glad that some people come over. I'm really sorry about the YouTube thing. I clicked it when we were live, tried to get it to enable it, but it just wasn't playing, so that's very annoying. Holly asks, how can you tell the difference between suppression of feelings and making progress in regards to emotional flashbacks? I worry that sorry, your question just bounced. I worry that I'm still denying how much certain things trigger me. How can you tell the difference between suppression of feelings and making progress in regards to emotional flashbacks? I would never be confused about those two things because they're completely different in my view. In my subjective experience, my own recovery, the suppression of feelings doesn't look, feel, or sound anything like progress in dealing with emotional flashbacks. Suppression of feelings is, it's kind of a permutation or manifestation of an emotional flashback. It's the desire to dissociate and to not feel the feels, to make it go away. So to depersonalize, to get out of your head and away from it. And that will never feel good. The overcoming of emotional flashbacks and actually making progress, even when it hurts or makes you feel sad or causes you to grieve, feels good, feels not good in like, it feels healthy. It feels like you will know that you're making progress. So yeah, suppression of emotions is never going to feel very good. It's always going to feel a little bit dirty and a bit guilty and a bit neurotic and a bit sweaty. So that's probably the easiest way to tell. I worry that I'm still denying how much certain things trigger me. I suspect you are denying how much certain things still trigger you. Don't run from the pain, Holly. Don't run from the pain. Don't run from the mess. I think sometimes when I'm talking to some of my clients, I get a feeling like that they're scared of the messiness of the emotion, that it's going to suck them in and obliterate them. It won't. It's only a feeling. It doesn't have that much power over you. Trust yourself. You're stronger than you know. Feel it, face it, name it. Be philosophical. Use a bit of psychology. Write it down. Journal about it. Write about it. So it's externalized, so you can see it. What is it you're actually feeling? When do you feel it? What kind of an emotional flashback do you think you're getting into? And you can open a dialogue with yourself about that. One of the great things about doing this kind of work is that over time you will improve your relationship with yourself and you'll improve your communication with yourself. The question thing keeps moving, which is rather annoying. I'm sorry, I can't use this. Oh dear. Have you got any tips on how to overcome? Oh, right. But you are using it. You're doing very well, says Ali. Sorry, I can't use this. Have you got any tips on how to overcome self-abandoning? when I'm upset, I just can't face eating. The thought of it makes me anxious, and it's not a weight issue. I also want to hide away and sleep. Thanks. There's nothing that I can give you in a pithy sentence that is going to help you to overcome self-abandonment. The only thing I can say to you is that the self-abandonment that you're driven towards at an unconscious level, that pattern, is a reflection of the way in which you were unnurtured, not nurtured by caregivers in your childhood. So if they abandoned you, then you will understand at the deepest, most unconscious levels of yourself, annoyingly, that that is what love looks like. So our ability to love ourselves, and our ability to, the style in which we love ourselves directly mirrors what our parents taught us about loving ourselves. So your way of loving yourself is going to directly mirror the way in which your parents loved you. That's another way of saying it. So if they abandoned you, then you will have a strong tendency to abandon yourself. So, really, you've got to get into the study of complex PTSD. You've got to deal with emotional flashbacks. If your emotional flashbacks still have that much power over you that you just don't want to eat, and you want to hide from the world and sleep, then you're at white belt level. Now, the cool thing about being a white belt level, about being a raw beginner, is that your gains, if this was strength training and I was a gym bro, I would say your strength gains are going to be huge, bro. So your progress will be huge. So you can actually, in a very short period of time, take a huge chunk of that emotional flashback strength away. You could read a book. You could read the Pete Walker book, or do some of the courses that we've got on overcoming complex PTSD. And in the space of an afternoon, if you really sink into it and you really, really focus on it, you could reduce the power of the emotional flashbacks by 15%. Within a week, you can reduce them by 25%. That's the power of being a newbie, which it sounds like where you are. That rate of progress drops off. You got like this huge, oh, I really understand, this is amazing, everything is cool now, and it really reduces, and it will stay reduced, but then getting to 30%, 35%, it does this, and then it's like that, and then it's a grind. You just have to, I still have to deal with my emotional flashbacks. I still have to deal with CPTSD. It happens, I lose the basics. Like, the basics of dealing with emotional flashbacks are to avoid it. Well, that includes like not getting stressed out with work, drinking plenty of water, taking care of your health, eating properly, avoiding certain people, situations, alcohol, drugs, nicotine, caffeine, blah, 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 whatever else. All of these things can make you more disposed to emotional flashbacking. So you don't want to be emotionally flashbacking. You need to look after yourself. So I'm sorry I can't give you much more advice than that at this time, but I hope that helps. Can you give me tips on how not to cry when I'm upset? It's been a real problem all my life. I think that's when you're supposed to cry. That's when I cry. Am I doing this wrong? Did I miss a meeting? I presume you mean that you're crying too much when you're upset. Then probably what is happening is there is an excess of grief and sadness inside of you, which means that at the smallest provocation, that you're going into like an emotional flashback, and there's like a reservoir of tears that is being tapped into in that moment. That needs to be processed. That grief needs to be dealt with and needs to be processed, and you need to feel that sadness in a boundaried, self-compassionate, self-loving way that permits you to be human and to be vulnerable. That maybe you could get the voice of your mother or father out of your head for a few hours that's telling you, I don't know, what did they say? Big girls don't cry. Or, grow up, stop sniveling, stop whinging. You were probably shamed in childhood for showing sadness, as many children are, showing grief. And that's why you struggle to do it now. So that's what you need to do, is you need to express that grief. And when that voice comes up saying, don't cry, don't be a whinge, but don't be so weak, then you need to repeat the mantra, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up. That will help. You do this out of a sense of Buddhist love and compassion. Shut your fucking face. Okay, the questions are bouncing all over here. Sorry about I think I'm reading them backwards. That's why. Good. No sound. Yep, I'm reading these backwards. We resolved that issue. Hi, Richard. And then nothing. Can you give me tips on how not to cry when upset? Done that one. I did, in capital letters, did have a wonderful upbringing, but still fell for a covert narc. Did realize that my mom was the controlling force, yet the ex-boyfriend was too. Fought the war between who was right for years, guilt-ridden for years, trying to please both and couldn't win. Can any Spartan life coach, brown and black belt, step in here and help our sister True Love? True Love, the handle name is True Love. You said you did have a wonderful upbringing, and you even put the word did in capital letters. I did have a wonderful upbringing. And then you went on to say that your mum is extremely controlling and caused you through guilt and shame to feel like you had to fight between her affections and the boyfriend. Therefore, you didn't have a wonderful upbringing. That's not great. I'm sorry I'm not being flippant. I need to, there's a lot of questions here. I need to go through them quickly. My advice to you would be to review the idea that your upbringing was wonderful. That sentence, my upbringing was wonderful, write it down on a piece of paper, and then write down some sentences after that maybe challenge that narrative, that piece of propaganda, and see what you feel about that. And if you feel overwhelming feelings of guilt and shame, and like you're being a dissident or rebel, and you're guilty of sedition for even thinking those thoughts or having those feelings, or if I'm making you feel guilty now by saying this and you're worried that your mum is going to find out that you watched this video, then things ain't all good in the hood, as it were, and there's a few issues there that could do with being resolved. Okay. Chrissy asks, how do you not in capital letters, how do you not suppress your feelings after you've been trained to do so all your life? Big question, good question. How do you not or do anything? Or how do you not do or do anything that you've been trained to not do or do all of your life? My preferred method, and it's going to sound facetious, but I'm being sincere, is hypnosis. The reason being that the way in which we get trained to do or not do things by people, caregivers, parents, authority figures, is usually through hypnosis. It's usually through hypnosis. It's usually through repetition over time that goes straight into the unconscious. So I just do the programming that goes in the opposite direction. I tend to give answers that are sound a little bit clunky and like I'm a mechanic and a bit, there's a little bit simple. But my background is in martial arts and the gym, doing weights and stuff. I like things that are simple. So I'm like, well, if they pushed you in that direction, you just push back in the other direction, then you should be okay. It sounds kind of dumb, I know, but for me, it's worked. And I can't see why, if it works for my brain and my central nervous system, and you're a human being just like me, why it can't work for you as well. So that would be the way I would go with that. I want to answer a few more questions. SJ Cafe says, I think my question may have gotten lost in the beginning, so I'm posting it again. It's probably my fault, SJ Cafe. I'm reading these backwards. So I like to make things difficult for myself. How do you learn to cope with the emotional flashback when you absolutely cannot go no contact? 2 children with my ex, and he was just awarded 3 weekends visitation a month. There is nothing more provoking of emotional flashbacks that I can think of than the situation you describe. A lot of people who are followers of the Spartan Life Coach are in that situation. And that's why I don't bang the no contact drum too loud or too long, because it's just not even possible for a lot of people, especially where kids are involved. If you know that somebody is a zombie witch doctor and the law says that they have access to your children, That's hugely provoking. It's probably one of the biggest tests you can possibly go through. So it's essential for you to make this a priority and to take this seriously. And you said, how do you reduce the emotional flashbacks? Let me just reframe your question and make it more useful for you. You've got to really look at it like this: the reduction of all the emotional flashbacks and emotional flashbacking in your house with you, because your emotional flashbacks will seep into your kids, and they'll seep into anybody you're in contact with, needs to be reduced whilst you handle this extremely provoking and difficult situation. So wherever you're at, white belt, yellow belt, blue belt, and overcoming complex PTSD and emotional flashbacks, you need to advance and advance rapidly. Make it a priority in your life. Take the time out, reduce the emotional flashbacks, because the more you're emotionally flashbacking, the less stable you are, and the less you'll be there, the less you'll be able to be present and calm and boundaried for your kids. They're modeling from you directly. They're modeling from you directly all the time. That's the difficult thing with having kids. There's an urgency to it. It doesn't matter that today you're just not in a very good mood or blah, 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 blah. They're looking at you and they're learning from you all the time, and it's going straight into their unconscious. So you reducing your emotional flashbacks now needs to be a big priority that you should tackle with the highest degree of urgency. Handling contact with a narcissistic abuser where kids are concerned, too big a topic for me to cover here right now. It's something I'm planning on doing a course on, because I can imagine that would be, well, I've sat with a very close friend of mine and watched him try to do it, and it nearly drove him mad. And he was one of my teachers, when it comes to psychology and that kind of thing. He was one of my teachers. But as soon as his ex-wife started playing with the visitation that he had and the access he had to his little girl, that was a pretty big string to a rather large hook that was placed somewhere around the heart chakra. And every time she tugged on that one, he lost his mind. He lost all of his presence. It's a very, very difficult situation, and I hope to be able to address that with the care and attention it deserves in time. My ex-zombie witch doctor is now dating someone else. Is it common for them to move on quickly and maintain a healthy relationship? She's told me we have a bond and I can never leave her. She has told me we have a bond and I can never leave her. Okay. Right. My ex-zombie witch doctor is now dating someone else. Is it common for them to move on quickly? Yes. Is it common for them to maintain a healthy relationship? No. They don't know what a healthy relationship is. The Gary Klein concept of the totem pole, where you can never have this in a relationship with a cluster B personality. They can't do horizontal relating. They can only do this, where they're above the totem pole and you're below them. That's all they know in relationships. So yes, they move on quickly. Well, what's to move on from? There was no genuine emotion and vulnerability and attachment there in the first place. That stings. That's not a very nice thing to say to you like that, but that's what you need to get your head around and in order to recover. And secondly, maybe this is a bit nicer and a bit more comforting for you. There's no chance that she can get into a healthy relationship with anybody else. She's no interest in healthy relationships with anyone. Healthy relationships is anathema to her. A healthy relationship would drive her crazy. So whatever she's gotten into so rapidly is just going to be another codependent narcissistic mess, and it will end dramatically and unpleasantly for both, or at least one of them. These people are like robots, and they repeat over and over and over again. Sorry for going through these so quickly. It is not proportionate to the importance or the validity of the questions. It's just a time factor. I'm currently looking for a job. Is there anything I can do to help with fading out during situations like interviews? That's a bummer. That really sucks. I've been there. I'm looking for a professional position. My triggers are worst around men. It's an emotional flashback issue. You kind of need to deal with this outside of the interview. Like, I can give you NLP tips that would help within the interview on the day, but it's not as important, not as powerful, and not as effective as you just handling it before the interview. You know, you might want to consider a little bit of self-hypnosis and visualization around, and affirmations around telling yourself that it's safe for you to be present, and to be aware during the interview process, and to enjoy it. Remember why you want that job. Remember why you're good at that job. Think of yourself doing that job in a way that is helpful to them. Be others focused. That's a really good time to be others focused, is when you're doing a job interview, because you know you're the product, they're the buyer. So it's all going to be like, what can I do for you? What can I do for your organization? What's your organization all about? What problem can I solve for you? If they get that vibe from you that you're going to solve a problem for them, then they'll hire you. It's not, you know, it's not very fuzzy, but that's just how corporate capitalism works. And it's not personal. It's just a business. And if you can get yourself into that headspace, you'll ace job interviews. That's how. Well, I used to teach in the schools, and I tell the school kids I've never failed a job interview, and that's how I've never. I think once, but that's a whole other story that we'll do another day. But I did a lot of jobs, and if I always used to say, I was quite cocky in my 20s because I was a psychologist, I was into NLP. I was like, if I can sit in front of somebody, I'll make them hire me, and I usually did. But it was like that. It's a simple trick. It was just, what do they want? I'm going to talk about how I'm going to solve a problem for them, and then get hired like that, and not, you know, not in an arrogant way, like, you know, be humble, be polite, be professional. Could you please write a book on overcoming people pleaser syndrome? Yes, I could. I'm a hell of a self-isolator, and for the most part, I really love not having humans around, because as soon as they are around, I'm in a relentless emotional flashback and I'm hypervigilant. My take on this is that this self-isolation is a great opportunity. I don't know where the rest of your comment went. Well, if you see self-isolation as an opportunity for something, then I'm not going to wrestle with you over that one. I'm not big on people self-isolating, but if you find it useful for you, then you're a grown sovereign adult, and I respect that choice. Okay. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Can we see Max? You tuned into this Google Hangout to see Max? That's offensive. No, he's asleep right now, and I'm not disturbing him. I'll put him in. And that got 6 likes as well. You guys. No, he's sleeping. It's late here. In the next YouTube video, I'll put him in. I promise. But no, not right. You can't see. This is sensible, serious psychological business. Can we see your dog? No. He's in the corner, farting gently. Doesn't want to be disturbed by vile humans, or me as one of those vile humans. Okay, just want to say thank you, Richie. You've helped me more this past year than I can possibly say. Keep it up. That's very kind of you, and I shall try to. It's hard to find people who believe you, because some of the things that have happened are so not normal. You don't know who you can talk to without them thinking you're making it up. Well, that's the usefulness of the online communities, the narcissism forums that you'll find online. Just be very careful that the people that be careful of the information you're sharing. Those online forums and even these Spartan Life Coach videos are very attractive to narcissistic personality types, to cluster B personality types. And it is a commonly reported problem amongst clinicians and amongst other YouTube users doing the same thing that I do, that people with narcissistic tendencies show up and they present themselves as a victim because they get something out of that. It's really sick. Kind of like Hannibal Lecter at the end of The Silence of the Lambs, where he wears a dead policeman's face as a mask. It's hard to find people. Oh, that was that one. Can you see Max? No. Last question. I've recently identified many ways that I flashback. Do you know why some flashbacks last days and some are very transitory, like 5 minutes? I don't. you could maybe try and email Pete Walker on that one, or maybe just look and see if that answer is out there. CPTSD is fairly new for me. I know a bit about it. I think it's you know, a really important and essential topic, but you know, I'm far from being an expert on it. The sensible side of my head says it could be related to the size of the trigger, or it could be related to the depth of the trauma. It's a bit simplistic, but it could be that, you know, if somebody has given you a really difficult trauma, a really difficult trigger, that would possibly make it last longer. And if that particular issue is still very unresolved and very inflamed and very prone to making you flip out, then that would make it last longer. Some people are very provoked by unfairness. I'm provoked by unfairness, but Layla Lorick, who I mentioned before, who wrote has written the new book on overcoming CPTSD, she's massively provoked by unfairness, and she explains why in the book. You know, for various reasons, like experiencing extensive bullying when she was a kid. So when she was trapped in a relationship, which this is all described much better in the book, with somebody who was a psychopath, there's all kinds of horrible things that he did. But the worst thing that he did, according to her subjective experience, was behave in a way that was unfair. Now, I hate unfairness, but it wouldn't have that effect on me. But for her, that created huge emotional flashbacks. For me, it would be something else. Right now, off the top of my head, I don't know what it would be. But there are certain things that people can do, and so I think like if I can think of one actually. One just occurred to me. If I see somebody else being bullied and I can't stop it, which reflects, you know, incidents that happened to me in my childhood, that really freaks me the fuck out. And I lose my sense of self. I lose my ability, or I can lose my ability to process in a way that is rational. It creates a very strong emotional flashback in me. My last big flashback, abandonment was triggered, lasted days, even though I was working hard on getting out of it. Ooh. The coach in me wants to say that there's a lot there in that sentence that is left out. There's so much there I don't know. May I presume, Kate, to coach you on this one and to look at what the context of what was actually going on there. So be vulnerable, be very brutally honest with yourself and say, well, what caused it to be such a big flashback? Abandonment was triggered. It lasted days, even though I was working hard on getting out of it. There's a kind of a naivety to this, like the way that you framed it. Like, hey, I was doing my exercises every day. But what you're not telling me is what that other person did. Like, if he kicked you out of a house and moved another girl in that day, and left you homeless in a big city that he'd invited you to move to, I'm making stuff up now, then there is no amount of exercises that you got from the internet or audio tracks you can listen to that won't cause you to go into a massive flashback, because the situation is so provoking. So don't be naive. You know, like there's stuff that you haven't told me there. That's just me speaking from that coaching point of view based on intuition. Okay. Last question. Okay. I just got a new job after being unemployed for a while. I'm so worried I won't be able to manage the job because of my CPTSD. I've worried so much that I'm not looking forward to it anymore, and I need to be motivated to manage. How can I stop worry? Just got a job. I won't be able to manage the job because of my CPTSD. How do I stop the worry about not being able to manage the CPTSD? You got to put the reps in, bro. It's back to that gym analogy. You've got to put the reps in. You got to put the work in on handling your CPTSD and grow that muscle, grow that strength, grow that ability to be able to handle emotional flashbacks. It takes time, but with time, you'll learn to trust yourself and you'll learn to trust the ability to handle the emotional flashbacks. Remember, I keep saying handle emotional flashbacks. We should all be training ourselves to avoid them. The best thing to do is to avoid them altogether. That's so much easier than actually handling a flashback once you've got right into it. Oh, somebody else liked a question from somebody else. This is the last one I'll do. Does EDMR work for CPTSD as well as PTSD? I thought it was called EMDR. EDMR, yeah, EMDR it is. I've heard you mention the EFT tapping as well. Layla Lorick tried EMDR. She describes this in the book, and she describes it really, really. She's very honest about this stuff. Like if it sucks, she's just gonna go, yeah. She's Swedish, so she'll just be like, no, it doesn't work. She doesn't care. She just say it doesn't work. It's rubbish. It's pointless. No, she did therapy and then EMDR, and she said it worked great. For her, I've heard stories from other people where it didn't work at all. I wanted to know more about EMDR, and I wanted to observe some sessions of it, but as yet I've not been able to. Based on the description of EMDR that I've been given, I can't see how it wouldn't work. I can't see how that wouldn't help you. It should help you, except if there's no rapport between the client and the patient. If the client has done no baseline work whatsoever on handling emotional flashbacks, or the third thing, if the person doing the EMDR, the clinician, the therapist, the coach isn't very confident, isn't very good, then yeah, that's going to suck. Under those three conditions, it's not going to work. But that's not because EMDR as a theoretical model doesn't work. EMDR as a theoretical model, as I've read it, I've never even seen a video of it being done. Sorry, I know there's videos out there I should have done by now, but I haven't had the time. The description sounds fine to me. Sounds good. Should work. Should it, if it works for PTSD, yes, it should also work for CPTSD to a degree. Okay, I wanted to invite people to be able to come on for a little bit before we wrap this up. I don't know how to do that. How embarrassing. Why can't I say anything on the question and answer thing? I wanted to post a link for you all. Maybe I can make this go public. How do I do that? Okay, I'm going to post a link. Chat. Enter chat message. This is a public link. I'm going to post this on the Google Hangout page as well. If you click this link, it's going to and you've got like everything set up in your webcam setup, it's going to put you straight through to the Hangout. If you do that, you will be public, and everything you say is public, and then it's recorded and it goes to YouTube and it stays there. So either cover your face, don't turn the camera on, or whatever if you don't want to be seen. If your handle, if your name is your real name and you don't want to be known, don't do it, because you could get recognized from your voice. It's very unlikely, but it could happen. So I'm just warning you, but I'm going to put this on the Google Plus page. And if you click it, you will come straight through to me, and then you will be live with me. So be careful, because it's a scary business. Somebody's written on the Google Plus page, when the world stops worshipping their monotheistic gods, who are all psychopathic narcissists, then we can conquer them. Until then, public exposure and cutting off their enablers, although temporary fixes work much better than running away from them, allowing them to be free to torture other people. Fight back. I think you're in the wrong meeting. That's wild. But and maybe there's some truth to it. Let's see. Right, I have posted that link. It's been shared publicly. It's on the Google Plus page now. If you want to join this Google Hangout, you'll be live though. If you hit that link, then you can. I'm just going to answer a couple more questions, see if anybody comes through. If nobody does, I will sign off. Oh, somebody who has who I did some hypnosis work with has posted not a question but a comment. She said, not a question, an affirmation. Self-hypnosis works really, really well, weirdly well, which is what I told this lady Sonia. I told you it would, and then it did. It worked great. Somebody else said, we can't see Max. Lol. You're not going to see Max. He's sleeping. Any opinion on Pete Walker's other book, The Tao of Fully Feeling? I don't, because I haven't read it, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't awesome. The CPTSD book that he wrote, Complex PTSD from Surviving Thriving, is without a doubt the most important book on psychology that I have ever read, and in my opinion, it's fantastic. Okay, somebody's jumped on. Somebody has joined this call. I haven't read it, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't awesome. The CPTSD book. Would you turn me down? PTSD from so you need to turn me down. Turn the volume down. Important book on psychology that I have ever read. In my opinion. Please turn me down. Turn me. That's awesome. Hello there. What can I do for you? Awesome. The CPTSD book. Would you there's two of you. One of you still has me playing in the background. Okay. Let's do this for later. Please turn me down. Okay. Petra, you still have me playing in the background. Could you turn me down, please, Petra? Sorry about that. Petra, I've had to turn you off because you had me playing in the background. Now, this lady, I'm going to unmute you. See, this all works so well. You muted Petra. Yes, I know. Now, how do I unmute this lady? Stay there. Don't go anywhere. I've muted you. Aye. This is tricky. Oh, God. Oh, now I've gotten rid of you. Oh, dear. Okay. If you call through, what you need to do is just make sure that obviously you're listening to me now. I'm playing in the background for you. So if you get through, turn your volume down so that people don't hear me playing back. Corey, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Cool. What can I do for you, sir?
I guess I just have a question. You said people with CPTSD could be considered odd or off-putting.
Yes.
What would be, I guess, some examples of that, and how do you find out, what's normal, I guess?
Examples of odd and off-putting behavior are, I mean, I'm not really going to encourage people to try and just conform to the norm, because I don't like the idea that psychiatry and psychotherapy can be used as a tool of just regulating people in some prefab idea of what normal is. What I'm talking about is when you do things that are perceived as bizarre and aggressive and unpleasant that you didn't mean, that you didn't want to be that way. You might at times want to appear bizarre or challenging or aggressive or whatever it is, in which case that's appropriate behavior. But if you don't want that, then that's the type of thing I'm talking about. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah. So I guess it would be just kind of like a reaction-seeking kind of thing, would you say?
Yes, it would. I mean, you've hit on another point there. There is a problem amongst sufferers of CPTSD that I've noticed over time, which is that there can be a predisposition towards being a little bit emotionally immature, and that can often manifest as a reaction-seeking behavior. I know this because I have a predisposition towards that and have done in the past, where I would be needlessly provocative, and I think my opinion today is that that is about an unconscious effort to seek boundaries because you don't really know where they are, and nobody showed you where they were nobody showed us where they were in parenting, and so you're trying to hit boundaries, and that can manifest as seeming to be a bit silly and engaging in reaction-seeking behavior. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, that's all I need to know.
Okay. Thank you very much, Corey.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Petra, can you hear me? No. Judja, can you hear me? your handle is JUDYTA. I might not be saying that right. I can't hear you at all.
Hello.
Hello. How do you say your name? Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Oh, Judita.
Judita. Sorry,
It's Polish.
that was a massive fail. Judtia is not right then.
It's Judy. Judy.
Judy. Let's stick with Judy. I can deal with that. What can I do for you, Judy?
Well, I'm watching your videos since 5 months because my narcissist left me 5 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I've been not very well. I've moved to another country, ran from him, and also I've went into lots of like relationships after to not be alone.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that I started doing exactly what he was doing to me because I have so many trust issues and I'm so hurt and angry all the time.
Yeah.
I meet these men, I love bomb them because I want them to fall in love with me, to want me so much, and then I make them do whatever I want, I need to make me feel good and loved and secure.
Mm-hmm.
But then I do the same, like I blackmail, I do the emotional, like I'm emotional, and then I leave them because I don't know, it's just so weird. So
It might be a good idea to just stay out of the whole relationship and dating game for a while. You're in a period of emotion. Sorry?
I've tried, but when I'm alone, it's not very good. I mean, I've hurt myself a lot. I've been in hospital as well.
Yeah.
Only recently I assigned myself to go to a doctor. For 5 months, I was just like stuck at home all the time. So
yeah, well, it's manifesting as an addiction. You're using it as a coping strategy, which you really shouldn't be doing. These are human beings. They're not drugs. They're not toys. And if you break them, it's going to cause a lot of bad karma for you. So you need to find a way to stop doing that. It's got to come down to you and you resolving these issues without using other people. And ultimately, it can't work. I mean, you've already experienced it. You've tried it a few times, you say, and it didn't work. It's not made you feel that peace and that calm that you're looking for.
So, because I want to go to see a doctor, and I've been advised at hospital to go to proper therapy, but as I was watching your videos, it's not that easy because most doctors, they don't really know. They don't know, and they don't know what to do with it. They just say to me, because I've already been on medication before and I had some depression before, they say like, be disciplined, think positive, do the right thing, but it's not really working.
No, you need to speak to somebody who's more of an expert in what this kind of thing is. So somebody who's either got a good grounding in CPTSD or narcissistic abuse. And the good thing about technology, where it's up to, and the internet, is you can find people online. If you can't just go to a mainstream counselor or therapist, it can make you worse. So do try and find somebody who is advertising or telling you that they understand what narcissistic abuse and CPTSD is about. That would be my advice for that one, rather than just saying.
I don't live that far from where you are. Do you know anywhere around the area? Because you're from Liverpool, right?
Yes.
I live in Leicester. It's like not far, so I don't know. Maybe
there's people you can speak to like this. You can speak to them via Skype. You don't need to see people face to face. So they could be in Germany, they could be in America. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, there's if you could do it that way, that would be better. At the moment, I'm not recommending anybody because I haven't had the time to check people. So unless I can, there is somebody who I know is very good at it, but she's not doing that kind of work at the moment, and I haven't found anybody else. But as soon as I have, I'll put a list on the website because you're not the first person to ask me this, and I can't really recommend anyone, and I won't recommend if I'm not sure that they really know what they're doing. But yeah, that would be the best advice I could give you now, is to find somebody who specializes in this.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your question. I'm going to take two more people's questions, and then I'm going to have to sign off. The next in line is Emmanuel. Can you hear me, Emmanuel?
I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, mate. What can I do for you, sir?
All right, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you. I bought your Street Fight Secrets Massive Pack. Great.
Okay.
I bought your first aid kit. That one was great too.
Excellent.
And I recommend it to everybody in the world. And so I wanted to ask you something. So you said on an audio years ago that you could teach us to do our own self-hypnosis drills.
Yeah.
Just for us to create our own affirmations. So can you maybe post it somewhere so that we can start doing it? I would really want to use it.
Where was that? Was that a Street Fight Secrets product that said that?
I think it was maybe the self-assertiveness course or some other one.
All right, mate. It's a really good idea. It would be a really useful tool. And the thing is, it's not that hard. Like the whole process of teaching you how to do it is not that hard. So I'll do that, and I'll get on that in the next few days. It'll be a fairly short course because it is straightforward. But yeah, I can do that, and it is a good idea, and I should have done that by now. So that's a good suggestion.
Well, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Emmanuel.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Kevin, can you hear me, sir?
I can, yeah.
Thank you for waiting. What can I do for you, mate?
Well, I've been through so many emotions, and right now I'm stuck. I'm stuck on the emotion anger. Whenever I have a flashback, I just get angry that I let the manipulation happen, that I let the lies be not seen, and getting past the anger towards my ex is really, really difficult. Whenever I have an emotional flashback, I just want to reach out and do everything in my power to put her in her place. And I know it's not healthy to be there. I can't get past that. That's what I'm struggling with right now, is that when I have an emotional flashback, it comes out as anger inside. Like, I don't beat people up and I don't wreck shit. I just get really fucking...
Yeah, which can almost be worse in some ways. I mean, because then it's not being expressed, which puts an enormous amount of pressure on you biologically, because we're designed to feel an emotion, then express it. But if you're feeling the emotion and it's not going anywhere, then it's not even being expressed. There's a thing that is happening here, and I can't go too deeply into this. I actually covered it in the London seminar that I did recently, and I will take.
I watched a little tidbit of.
Say that again.
I watched a little bit of it online. You posted a video, but it didn't get to what I needed it to get to.
No. The bit that you've seen that same day, about 2 hours later, I start talking about what happens in the unconscious as far as emotions being processed go. I'll chop it and I'll upload it for you. Basically, what it says is that anger, or whatever the persistent emotion is, relates to what your unconscious mind thinks that you're capable of doing in the longer term. So your anger that you're feeling now, don't hate the anger, right? Because what that anger is, it's a signal from the unconscious that's saying, you're still in danger, mate. Wake up. You're in danger. This could happen again. Your brain is telling you, no, this is about the ex. But really, it's about the future, because right now you don't feel safe, and that's manifesting as a persistent feeling of anger. If we can get ourselves to the place where we feel safe again, like if you can process that anger, process the fact and go, I fucked up, I really did, and totally just be vulnerable, just embrace it and go, I fucked up, I should never have let anybody do that to me, but I did, and I will never let myself do that again, because for 5 really rock solid concrete reasons why you won't do it again that you truly believe, at that point you'll be able to move on and the anger will diminish. So it's kind of it's a warning signal that's just playing out in a not very helpful way. I think that's probably the best way of describing it. And I had the exact same thing, but I had it for like I think 3 years after the relationship ended, and I was still like full of just rage, just like but it was an impotent rage. I couldn't do anything with it. I had nowhere to go. And then I realized that's what was going on, and I managed to get rid of it.
So I should probably stay away from any kind of relationship right now.
Until this is processed, until the anger is processed, and until you genuinely feel safe in the core of your being that you won't let yourself do this again, yes, stay away from it. I mean, the thing is, dude, with all that anger inside of you, as soon as you approach anybody, if they're a good potential partner, and they feel that anger that isn't even about them, you could scare them away. That would be a real tragedy. That means your ex would be winning twice. That's unacceptable.
Totally.
So I'm going to chop that bit of video clip out, and I'll post that on Friday. And it's you'll know it's for you because you'll see in the seminar I'm drawing a really lame picture of a donkey. I know it sounds crazy, but stick with it. Yeah, when you see me drawing a picture of a really crap picture of a donkey, that's for you. Okay, mate?
Gotcha.
All right.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thanks for your call. I'm going to take one more question, then I'm going to sign off. Hello, sir. How are you?
Well, unfortunately, since last we spoke 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. Things have gotten worse, although I now am more aware of certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a very specific question, or two linked questions.
Okay.
How to deal with kind of emotional trauma that grips you where there isn't an immediate cause to it, but on top of that, where you're not even linking it to anything specific, where it's not, oh my goodness, I've met this person, you know, I'm feeling like the way I felt with my parents or old friends or whatnot. You're sitting at home in your apartment, vacuuming, whatever, and then all of a sudden you're like debilitated by a bunch of emotions, maybe anxiety, maybe fatigue, maybe anger, and you might flight, as you've explained. What to do with that, where it's sort of just like a shock that hits you that you may not be even able to process intellectually. So
the first level response I would have would be to say, okay, how do we frame this? The way that I would frame this, I would say it's like an invisible sniper attack. It's an invisible sniper. You've no idea where the attack is coming from. You've no idea the angle, the trajectory, how many, you know, what the intent is until after it's happened. You can't avoid that. You can't prepare for that because it's out of the blue. There can be the possibility that you have triggered yourself. That sucks. So you're actually having like thoughts, conversations, something was going on in your own mind, and then you triggered it. Like you just ended up in a place where you accidentally stepped on a mine in your own mind. Nothing, there wasn't a phone call from a friend. It wasn't like, you know, like you saw a red car and it reminded you of an accident you were in a red car 3 years ago. It's not that. It's just your brain is forming links. I did a video with a coach called James Neidlinger. James Neidlinger, Awesomology, the video is called. It's an interview that takes place. Unfortunately, it's got a very noisy background because I think he had to film it outside of his gym. But he's a really switched on dude. And he was saying that the way neural connections are formed are actually way more complex than we would usually talk about them. And there could be 5 degrees of separation between the stimulus and the emotion you feel. And he can explain this way better than I can. But he was like, you could see a red post box and get a traumatic response because the red post box tricks back to the color red, which reminds you of your grandmother, which reminds you of your mother. And you could, like, how are you gonna, a normal person doesn't have the time to sit there and analyze their thoughts like that. So I appreciate that it can be difficult, if not impossible, at times to track back the source of the emotional flashback. And if that's the case, then you have to sort of be open with yourself about it and go, okay, That's an invisible sniper attack. Didn't see that coming, couldn't do anything about it. What did happen? What can I do to try and ameliorate that kind of situation in the future? Because you've got to get a foothold wherever you can sometimes.
The reason I asked it, just to give some concreteness, is that I often find after meals, I tend to fall into that kind of state. And I'm thinking it may not even be like the meal or anything specific. It just might be sort of physiological process triggering a psychological one, whereby it's sort of like your brain has been adapted by some previous traumatic experiences. And is, let's say, when you eat, a lot of blood drains from your head and goes to your stomach from all your limbs. And it might be that in the past, you've often been, your brain has formed and been traumatized such that when you lose a bunch of blood from your, like when it drains, your brain goes into a panic, for instance. It could be something of that, where it's nothing to do with the actual process. It's just that because of the past trauma, your brain is reacting to completely normal situations in panicky ways. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I do, and I think your analysis is valid. You know, people are going to jump in here when they see this. There's a lot of weird and wonderful people that follow the channel, doing all kinds of weird and wonderful research that is around the connection between the stomach, the gut, the brain, and emotions. Now, again, that's like a second level response, and it's beyond my remit. Like, I don't know enough about that. My first level response would be, well, hey, what happens when we get full? How do we feel about that? You're a cerebral intellectual type. If you feel the blood draining from your primary organ, you might feel like, I'm out of fucking control. I'm not clear. I need to be clear. I'm not clear. I'm not, and that's where the panic could be setting in.
And that makes perfect sense. So anyways, and I guess the next thing is linked to this, how to deal with less, like things that trigger you, but that are maybe more abstract. Like you may fear, for example, that there's a war on the horizon, or you may fear not understanding a concept in physics or psychology or something, and where you would really like to work on the problem, think about it, but it's maybe very ephemeral. It doesn't have to be a scientific topic, but it could be something that you can't say, well, it's, you know, very specific. It's neither like random, you have some grasp, but it's not specific either.
I'm tempted to play the boring counselor here and say that this sounds like another control issue, where you're being triggered by the sensation that something is not within your grasp, and therefore it's not within your control. Yes, there is a war on the horizon. Yes, it's potentially hugely catastrophic. I'm amazed you haven't asked me about the Illuminati or the lizard people yet. I'm disappointed.
Not saying that, no.
but
I did leave a comment.
It could be, it could just be that, a control issue. For a moment there, I was reminded of the show Homeland. You know, you have this neurotic, psychotic CIA agent. She's brilliant, but she's barely held together. And the way they've constructed the character, the narrative of that character, is what drives her so obsessively. Is she's terrified that she'll miss one detail in all the chaos and all the information that could avert a disaster, because she felt like she missed the detail on 9/11. You know, let's not even touch whether we believe the official story of that. Let's say we do. Yeah. So she
there is so symptomatic of some of the things I go through. It's like, well, if I miss just one thing, you know, then it's over. You know, I'm defeated. You know.
Well, this is classic for catastrophic thinking, which is what many people would say. Well, that's borderline personality disorder, and I'm like, whoa, back off a second. Could be CPTSD as well. There is a tendency within us to fear lack of control, and to catastrophize. Now, here's something about me that I've never spoken about on the channel, but people might find it useful, a bit of vulnerability. I'm very scared of flying. And when I fly, I start thinking about war and politics. There is an association for me to do with being on a plane and fixating on political issues. And I start reading stories from the papers obsessively. And I'm like, well, did I check Al Jazeera? Did I see Russia Today's angle? Maybe I should check Sky News again. And I'm like, this is not, what the fuck are you doing? This is not you. This is you going into some, and I get into paranoid conspiracy theorist mode. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just something really human, like a fear of death, or a very primal fear of being up in the sky, 5 miles up, flying around at 500 miles a fucking hour. I don't know. I don't know. So, you know, I sympathize with that desire to know the details and how the small thing, the microcosmic thing, plays into the macrocosmic thing, and that maybe we're missing something, and that is going to cause a catastrophe. But don't worry, the catastrophe is imminent. There's nothing we can do.
We're already dead.
I love to end these on a high note, so thank you so much for helping me to do that.
Well, you're welcome. Behind these smiles are lakes of tears.
Right. Well, I'm going to end on that. Right. Just you know, join the Illuminati, and you can fly away on their magic spaceship, and you'll be saved.
Yes. Blast up into space. Salute.
Take care, mate. Bye bye. Okay, folks. Thank you very much for joining me. Enjoyed that. I hope you guys did too, and found it useful. And we will do this again. When it's supposed to be an hour, it went on for an hour and 45. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for your time and your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Thank you.